All right, everybody. So I sent Sensei home to take a rest because she was driving home from the East Coast yesterday. Spent a good 10 hours plus, and she got home late, I think around midnight or so, and said, okay, you're good, go take a rest. All right, so let's just continue on then with further questions or prompts for conversation, if there are any. Particularly if there's anybody who hasn't offered a question as yet that would like to. Tenzin, please. Yeah.
My name is Tenzin. I wrote myself a note before we left to ask Rinsen to specify in regards to Bujo's question, and it had to do with the opposites. There's the greed, and then there's the the hatred, and then you said in the middle there's the apathy. Mm-hmm. And so is that not distinguishing in particular diseases of the mind, such as dementia, where the mind isn't really able to function?
Yeah.
From this spiritual standpoint?
Right. I mean, so the possible experiences you can have are positive, negative, or neutral for any one of the sense minds, right? So the eye can see something that it finds attractive, repulsive, or neutral. And so the entire sense mind system is kind of like that. So mindfulness is about being able to discern what is wholesome and what is not wholesome. So in terms of the what you might term Buddhist psychology, okay, this sort of theory of mind or this way of talking about our experience says that wholesome has to do with alleviates suffering and unwholesome has to do with that which increases it. I don't think the Buddha had particular insight into dementia and into bipolar disorder and to all the things that we would have some insights into now, you know what I mean? So any more than he understood gravity theory or particle physics or germ theory for that matter, right? So, I mean, the fact is that in any physical organism, things can go wrong. The skin, you know, your largest organ, I mean, stuff can happen with the skin, you know, and the liver and the spleen and everything else, right? And the brain is no different. There can be and often are pathologies and ailments, maladies that we think of as being of the mind. What I would say is that, you know, if you think about the Buddhist teaching that there's no solid fixed self, right? And understand that as a person's grip on who they are begins to erode, that's an expression of reality as well. It's painful, it's unwelcome, but you know, at some core, I've gone to meet elders in my family as they're nearing passing on and they don't recognize their own kids anymore and all this. And I have to say that the drama that can come from that is really optional, in my view. Understandable, but really, is it so problematic? I mean, it's the most natural thing in a lot of ways. As people end the ending of their life, if they're lucky enough to live long enough, there's often sort of a disconnecting from sense experience. There's often a sort of slowing of the body, a drying of the body. And there's also a slowing and a drying of the mind, so to speak. And this is quite natural. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that, here's what I would not say. If someone is diagnosed with dementia, it doesn't mean that there's some spiritual failing on their part and they're being punished for it, or that, that they have had the sinful thoughts and therefore God's visiting this upon them, or any story like that, I think the clearest thing to say is that illnesses come from lifestyle, and they come from genetics, and they come from random chance, about equal parts, I would say. I'm no physician, but that's how it seems to me. There's genetics, there's lifestyle, and there's still just the luck of the draw. Who can say why? You know, so this is why it's very important that while, you know, each of us is guaranteed, if you keep living, you will experience decline. There's just no, the only way you don't experience decline is if you die before it starts to become palpable to you. So it's either an early death or you experience decline until you die. There's some optimism. So the business is that while you and I are in a precious human life, and we are cogent enough, coherent enough, and we have the right capacities to be able to practice, we really ought to. Because there will come a time where this very body that you're in right now will not be able to. That's going to happen, right? And so, you know, I mean, we've all been probably in moments where practice is not accessible for physical reasons, you know. So the practitioner's guide would say, I too am of the nature to lose my body and lose my mind and lose all my possessions, and everything I have and everyone I love is of the nature of change. All my talents, capacities, everything I identify with and as will all be taken away in time. No doubt about it. So what to do? Well, while you're cogent enough and physically able enough to train, you should train. You should really jump in. And when people start having these experiences that aren't training or that are, tons of patience and compassion and tons of understanding. You know, in a way, it's no different from these beautiful green leaves that are just now pushing out in the thrush of spring. You know what direction that's going to go. There will come fall at the end of that leaf's life cycle, and we can recognize it as beautiful. So too with human lifespan. The end of life actually is just as beautiful, even though it doesn't look like it does in the spring. Being able to appreciate each stage exactly as it is, both when you're going through it, do as much as you can, and when others that you love are going through it, is meeting reality well. And as Dogen says, you know, when spring blossoms bloom, we enjoy the fragrance, and when the flowers fall in the coming of winter, we do feel grief. It's not that there's no grief there. It's just that it's the Dharma expressing his grief. Jigen, please.
It's already on. My name is Jigen. Roshi, as you were talking about upaya, one thing that kept coming to mind for me is like recent research that's come out on the nature and most effective way of being a leader. Oh. And so leadership being most effective when it's done by someone who's doesn't really want to be in that position, but they're there to serve other people, and they're there to bring cohesion and lead when they need to lead and adjust their methods as they need to adjust them. And I was just like, as you were speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually now showing up in leadership research. But the research is also showing that the people who often rise to leadership and who are voted for and who are promoted do not possess those qualities.
Yeah, the narcissists.
And so my question, I guess, is like, what the hell? Or like, yikes. Or like, how do we manifest?
Samsara, babe.
Oh.
Samsara.
Why is that always the answer?
Yeah, well, because it works. But I mean, you know, it's true. I mean, the fact is that, like, there, if you're immured to empathy, and you don't have that, right? And you're really all about yourself, it does give you a kind of power. And you can be very charismatic and very full of yourself, and you can say all the words and stuff like that, but the mind that's wielding that is radically impacted on itself. And it just uses other people, it sees other people as tools to be used to the ends. And unfortunately, we have it deep in our our psychological evolution. We know in ourselves that when push comes to shove, the tribes that have a strong, charismatic leader win. And I mean survive. So there's that sort of brute fact, you know what I mean? And it's most regrettable, it really is, because, certain people just really want that strong leader, and they'll just follow it because it feels correct and right, and they feel safe or something like that. But as soon as we start to be at all self-reflective, and I'm not talking high levels here, as soon as we start to get at all reflective, it's like, that kind of leadership, that kind of way of being in the world is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Most of the ills that we live in terms of society have to do with those kinds of folks making really those kinds of decisions that the vast masses of humanity simply had to acquiesce to or be beheaded or whatever, and that perpetuates, So I hope for our species that we will outgrow this kind of, the bully on the playground becomes the leader of the pack because they can pound everyone else. It's like, come on, you know what I mean? I don't know that that's what you were asking, but, like why, and delusion. Awakened people wouldn't put up with it, wouldn't vote for it, wouldn't want them to, they wouldn't be voted in as the dean or the chair or the president or whatever. It wouldn't happen. But the deluded mind wants security. And sadly, it wants identity. So if it'll project some aspect of its identity crystallized around this external force that will play into that. And so you have this sense of self-righteousness. And you can't have that if you don't have an enemy. So you got to find some group, they will manufacture conflict to create the circumstances wherein the followers will be driven to their wing. You know what I mean? And this is a deep factor of, I think it's a deep factor of human evolution and psychology. One of the things that we do differently from other species, to my knowledge, is we find ways of organizing and acting in much larger groups than we could ever personally have relationships with. So that has a positive and a really negative side. The positive side is Dawn could drive from Boston to Toledo and the traffic is the same, everybody followed the same rules and we all got along. The negative side is that we can very easily sign on to something that really is unwholesome without recognizing it because it feels right. Yeah. But enlightened leadership doesn't play in that stuff. Please.
Hello, my name is Craig. So something that I've been thinking about that came up based on what you've been saying, what some of the other people have been saying, is how much is enough? What I mean is just like, how much enlightenment do you have to have and how long do you have to enjoy it? It's like, because in our lives we tend to quantify things with goals and objectives. So gosh, what if I don't achieve enlightenment until I'm 98 years old and then I die the next day? My gosh, have I missed out over the past 97 and a half years? It's something I've been thinking about, especially when we're talking about, skillful means and training. So I guess it's its own form of suffering. But so I guess it's more like a comment than a question, but it's something I do think about when you talk about training. It's like, okay, if I haven't done this God, if I just utterly failed at it, and if I only achieve it and I only get to enjoy it for a day, gosh,
Why not just suffer the whole time?
Yeah.
Get it over with. Yeah.
Have I blown it, you know? You know, in a sense, it's like, okay, I relate this to martial arts training. It's like, oh, God, we got to get our black belt. But after having training in martial arts for over 10 years, I'm like, who cares if you get a black belt? That's not what it's about, you know, having a black belt. Anyway.
So here's the thing, all right? There's a bit of a paradox here. One, you already are it. So there's that, okay? But then there's the practical business of like you say, training, right? Now, what I would say is this. If I switch metaphors to being a music teacher, right? If I have a student who's learning the rudiments of the instrument, if they just are taken with the rudiments of the instrument and how does this work and how does that work, and they just engage with the thing, they'll make progress. I can actually remember the first time I brought a guitar home from school. I sat down in my bedroom and I took the guitar and I laid it on my lap, and they had this pick and this guitar. I didn't know which way to hold it or anything, but I just started taking the pick and like hitting the strings in different patterns. And I was amazed that it was actually making sounds, and I was doing little permutations with them, and I'm still doing that now, right? So I'm more experienced, I'm more in control of the thing, but that same, wow, what is this? And playing with the sounds, that quality of mind is immediately accessible. Now, at the same time, if, say, a young student is encountering the rudiments of the instrument and they create an internal fever over the fact that they're not playing as well as their older sister is, let's say, because everybody in the house will take piano lessons. So now it's their turn, and okay, so the older sister is playing this thing and they can't, and all this other stuff is happening that's actually in between that young person and the instrument. So what you find is in people that are really, really heavy players is they're still like little kids around the instrument. They're still like in awe of what's there, and they're still trying to discover and explore new things. So the quality of mind is actually the same everywhere along the path. There is no sense that, okay, now I've arrived and that's it. I've solved the guitar, I win, and game over. It doesn't happen like that. What ends up happening is that the more you know you don't know, and the more enjoyment actually you can experience in the quest. And so in a very real way, my experience of the Dharma is like this. I can say officially, as someone who sits on the high seat authentically, the Dharma is constantly unfolding and is amazing to me. And as I'm as interested to hear a Dharma talk today as I was the first time I ever encountered one. And yes, there's progress, and yes, there are stages, and yes, there can be recognitions along the way that are nice. But the most important thing actually is develop that beginner's mind, that mind of freshly encountering every time what's going to happen. What is the Dharma now? You know? So that fresh and new quality of mind and being on the path is always what it feels like, regardless of how far along one is by any objective measure. So the main thing then is if you notice rumination or stressing over, you know, can I play the piece my older sister can or not, then this is not a helpful way to relate to the thing. The most helpful way to relate to the thing is engaging it right now with complete beginner's mind. And that's 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years plus later. It's still beginner's mind and just actually enjoying it. That first day, I can remember it, I was just as much enjoying discovering what happened with this pick that I didn't know how to hold and these strings that I had no idea how to tune. It's just as much as the last gig I played. And it'll stay that way. There won't come a point where it's like, okay, I've solved it. Do you know what I'm saying? And then it is true that there are markers and they do matter. There are milestones that get hit. But the best way to attain them is to really not concern yourself with them. It's your teacher's job to be concerned with your progress, not yours. You should not concern yourself with that. You should concern yourself with bringing beginner's mind to engaging the Dharma. That's your job. The teacher's job is guiding your practice. For example, those that have been asked to be Shuso were asked to be Shuso. They didn't ask to become the Shuso. That's not how it works. There are some people for whom perhaps the capacity to be a Shuso is there, but it would not be good for their practice in ways that that person doesn't realize, but the teacher can see quite clearly. That doesn't mean that that person's practice is less. It simply means that in the eyes of the teacher, that's not going to help that person at this time. And a good student will see it that way and receive it that way. A student that's concerned with, I need a blue Roxu and a fan, will obsess over that. I want my blue Roxu and my fan. Do you know what I'm saying? So kind of interestingly, as Jigen was saying, it's it's time for the blue Roxu and fan when you're not obsessed about the blue Roxu and the fan. Something like that. Does that help? Yeah. Main thing, enjoy your life. Really enjoy it, and make sure you're enjoying your practice. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Kelly? Yeah.
I'm Kelly. So to kind of go along with that, and I'm paraphrasing here, so you talked about the sentient being can only see the Buddha's Dharma based on disposition, understanding, prejudice, propensities, circumstances, and causes and conditions. So does that mean that, because I know the Dharma is present in everywhere and everything, does that mean that we come to the Dharma at that and to accept that, but to continue to be, we have to be of the right intention to complete our practice and expand our practice in order for the Dharma to fully open itself to us. We're coming to it, it's not coming to us, correct?
It's both. I mean, what I would say is that I'll go back to music, okay? If you take somebody who doesn't know anything about music and you plop them in front of a Beethoven symphony, let's say, they're going to hear a certain amount of it. But if you take somebody that spent 30 years training their ear and studying music, they're going to experience something very different. They're sitting right next to each other. It's the same symphony. But it's a matter of experience and integration. So, two, if someone's like in architecture, because I know nothing about architecture, but I know that if an architect walks in this building, they're going to tune into things that are just opaque to me. So the Dharma is like that. So the Dharma is happening all the time, everywhere. It is everything. But my ability to be sensitive to that and to tune into that depends on how acclimated I am to the Dharma. How deep my relationship with Dharma is. So therefore, I want to do everything I can at every stage to engage my training and my practice. Now, if you start trying to quantify the difference between person A's experience and person B's experience, and it's any context other than how to help them make progress, this is a trap. Because the fact is, the person who has no training in music can have a full measure of joy, let's say, at hearing the symphony. And the other person who's had 50 years of musical training will have a full measure of joy, let us say, with a bunch of technical static probably getting a little bit in their way. Oh, the oboe was a little slow on the take there, that kind of stuff. But the main thing is that actually it's just right now. So the way the sutra says it is that the Buddha almost is making this, you could say this one sound, let's say, and it's reverberating everywhere. But what individual beings hear depends on the state that they're in. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so it's both. Yeah. Please.
So yeah, I guess thinking about suffering and karmic conditions or causes and conditions, are there times when it's appropriate to, or when the skillful means could be to take on someone else's suffering or part of their suffering to alleviate
Potentially.
to alleviate, to help them out or
Yeah.
change their karmic position?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So first of all, one must be very, very grounded in equanimity as a base. Then one must have trained the mind of compassion in the sense of wishing well for others. And one must acclimate oneself to this as your standard default mental state. Okay, that really has to happen first. Because what this does is this gives you a solid center and it has your heart inclined towards kindness. And there's a lot of work to be done there. Then what I would say is that one's wisdom eye needs to kind of start opening here. The Dharma eye needs to start functioning. Now, once that occurs, then the way you perceive others' suffering will change. From that perspective, taking on the suffering of others becomes something that's quite workable. But if it's taken on earlier than that, it can be quite debilitating. There is a practice of Tonglen, it's called. Metta is the practice where you practice loving kindness for others and for self, and this is really important. Then Tonglen is a practice where you, and again, this is sophisticated, and I do not recommend this to your general person to do, but you can actually breathe in the suffering of other people. You can take it in, and what you don't do is then suffer it for them. That is not what happens. What actually happens is you take in the suffering and you practice. Because you are an enlightening being, because you are a bodhisattva, you are skilled in certain ways of the Dharma, and therefore you have tools and capacities that other beings do not. So you can breathe in and bring the suffering that they're experiencing into yourself, not so that you then suffer, but actually, so what you do is you practice and you transmute that suffering into something beautiful. And then that is contributed back to the world. So the classic analogy for this is the peacock. The peacock will ingest things that to other creatures are quite poisonous. But because of the way the peacock is structured, it can bring in those toxins and transmute them into that beautiful plume that it has. And it makes beauty. And this is kind of an image. So please note, this is very different from martyrdom. This is not, I'll take on the sufferings and I'm just going to suffer in this very dramatic and public way for lots of applause or appreciation or self-deprecation or whatever. It's not martyrdom. It's practicing the suffering. So I take the suffering on and I practice it on behalf of those who cannot. But you have to know how to practice first. Does that make sense? Now, practically speaking, what does that do? Well, The most important thing that it does is it changes our way of relating to the world's suffering. What it is to hear the cries of the world and be crushed by them is something very different than to hear the cries of the world and to practice them. Practicing with the cries of the world is not the same as just being crushed. Guanyin is not crushed. She does hear the cries of the world, and she does cry, but she knows how to practice. Does that make sense?
And yeah, actually, that was one extreme I was thinking of, is like the monk, I forget his name, that set himself on fire essentially to bring, try to bring more attention to the Vietnamese War, right?
Yeah,
During that time, like, is that seen as martyrdom? Like, and I didn't know like what.
I don't
How's that
recommend
interpreted?
Please don't go and light yourselves on fire, folks. Bad for morale on the whole. Yeah. Messy, fossil fuels. It's a lot of reasons not to get involved in that. It's a. What was that? Okay. Yeah. I don't hold that up as any ideal. I really don't, and I can't comment on the state of that monk's practice or what was going on there. It certainly made an impact. Whether or not it was to the net positive or negative, it's hard for me to know. I don't know. But I could say quite clearly, if anyone comes to me and says, you're Buddhist, I hear Buddhists like self-immolate in the name of good causes. Would you bless me to go and burn myself alive in front of one government center on behalf of the noblest cause you can imagine? The answer is no. Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? We'd have to have a serious call, and I'd have my hand on the phone to get psychiatric assistance. That's how I read that. Now, I'm not making a direct comment on whoever that monk was back in that day. I don't know. But no, see, like if I took on, think of it another way, if my teacher took on the suffering of the world in a way that incapacitated them from being useful, then they would not have been able to guide me in my training. Then I would not have been able to come to whatever realization I have, and then we would not be able to practice in the way that we're currently practicing. So somewhere back in time, every one of the ancestors had to put up a little mental wall and say, like, no, this is what I'm doing. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. And this is what we're doing here for the greater good. Does that make sense? So it's quite utilitarian from that perspective. It's like, what amounts to the greatest good? First of all, you have to take care of yourself, and you have to practice and develop, see? And if your practice is such that you're constantly being like chewed up by the churn of the world, then we need some equanimity there. I'm not saying not to have feelings. Of course, everyone has feelings, but the way Guanyin does, the way Avalokiteshvara does. She has the 10,000 arms, each with its own eye, each doing its own thing to help. And yes, there's a tear, but there's also a twinkle. Does that make sense? The other thing to say is that, it's not really in your interests to spare people from the karmic results of their actions. It's not good for them. It's not good for you. The best thing is to say that may the karmic consequences of these actions come swiftly upon and be felt keenly. In this way, this sentient being can learn the lesson and grow. If I spare others from the results of their karmic activities, as though I could, it's just to say it, but if I did, then that person's not going to get the experiences they need to grow and to develop. So the trees out there, like if I said, oh, those poor trees, look how they're getting pushed around by the wind, I'll save them. And I put a big plexiglass cylinders around them to keep the wind from pushing on those poor trees, then the roots aren't going to be strong, because when the tree pushes against the wind or the wind pushes against the tree, the roots go, wait, and they dig in, and that's how the tree gets strong. So parenting, right? We go from this moment where the kiddo is literally dependent on you for life in every way conceivable, and eventually that has to shift. Eventually, they have to start, as we all did, we have to go through this process. And so what the good parent does in this case is to offer counsel and guidance and to be present as companion with them, but very much let their lives hit them full contact. And you're with them no matter what. No matter what happens, you're there. You're committed to that. And that stability is in place. But it's not about putting up a wall so that they have no consequences to their life. Does that make sense? So in the same way, I wouldn't actually want to take the consequences from someone's karmic trajectory away from them. This is not going to help them. It's not help them. What you need to do is be able to take the suffering and transmute it into something that's nutritive for their development. That you can do, and it doesn't hurt them, and it doesn't hurt you. And sometimes people will say, oh, you know, you're a Buddhist, aren't you supposed to be just a constant bleeding heart? And, you know, how can you do this or that when you should be doing this or that other thing? And it's ill-informed.
My name is Kristen. So I'd like to build kind of on Doan's question and Kitgetch's question and Kokai's questions. So thinking about children and who often have the causes and conditions imposed upon them, and then the systems around us are making the decisions that may be imposing more harm and cosmic conditions.
Yeah.
And then if you're part of the decision that's making that, even if you don't agree with, there's no consensus, and you're not making that decision, you feel you're still contributing to the harm of those cosmic conditions. Mm-hmm. But so I guess like how to. You've talked about how Buddha is like love and compassion is a big thing, but mm-hmm. like for kids in foster care, like, oh, love is enough to help them, and then you have Jesus's love or whatever, and then you have more harm because you're putting more of those cosmic messiness on them by putting more trauma on them.
By sending them to Jesus camp?
No, by not helping them move through their own karmic conditions and things and saying love is enough.
Well, okay, so I can help someone move through their karmic causes and conditions just fine. I can't,
which is what you were saying with him.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, that's fine, you know. Is that what you're asking about?
Like, I guess... I guess I think that I've seen a lot of kids being harmed further because people are like, love is enough, and we're not helping them through those conditions, right?
Can you say the last part again slowly and clearly? Love is enough, and then?
Love is enough, like, but then the kids are not helped through what they need, and they say love is enough, and then they expect love to be enough, and...
Yeah, I wouldn't say that myself. I would never tell someone love is enough. You know, you need food.
Right.
You need shelter. You need stability. You need safety. You need,
right.
You need psychological limits and boundaries. You need a good, solid sense of self. I mean, these are all foundational things. You know, love's not nice. I love love, but also, you know, clear boundaries and lines are important. Discipline is important. So there's nothing in the sutra that says love is enough. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
That's not really what I read the sutra.
Love and compassion, I guess love and compassion is the ideal, right?
Well, think about it this way. There's love and compassion, right?
Yes.
But that actually also manifests as the sword of Manjushri. And that's not separate from love and compassion. So love and compassion doesn't mean just uber empathetic, acquiescing, they're there. It doesn't mean that. I mean, Manjushri has a severe side that can show up and needs to show up at times. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas don't always show up as kind, gentle, nurturing, milk and cookies, warm blankie, they're there. Sometimes, but sometimes it's like, hey, I'm throwing the damn video game out. You need to get a job right now. Bang. And that can be very severe and exactly what that young person needs to hear. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Is that different from what you're saying?
Yes. So what you answered makes sense, but I'm not making my question clear. I guess, like, in terms of I guess, so you also talked about sharing stuff. So, like, at what point can you share not clean things that you've learned and share kind of that love and compassion with the kids and things like that with, like, because I guess there's a lot of, do I know enough? How can I do this, like, and transmit this further to help kind of a kid that doesn't have the love and compassion, the support, the boundaries, all of those things. Is that clear, or?
All that we can ever do is meet the moment that rises in front of us with as much clarity and compassion as we can muster. That we can do. Okay? The results of that we cannot know. I cannot guarantee a single outcome at all. All I can do is ensure that to the best of my abilities, my intention, my motivation is coming from equanimity and compassion and wisdom. That's something I can contact, okay? What I can't really contact, especially if we're talking about foster kids, to be specific about it, these kiddos are coming into the foster home with worlds of pain that you will never have access to. You have an incredibly limited view on what's going on with this young person. Ever will it be so. It's that way with kids of your own biological descent, for God's sake, that you've birthed and had around you for life. You still have a limited window into there, because you know, specifically from a Buddhist point of view, it's not just this life. There are many, many prior births, each with its own karmic storehouse, all of which gets catapulted into this one. So even in the most idyllic circumstances, you have a limited ability to actually see what's going on, okay? So therefore, what can I do? What I can do is make sure that I'm using as much equanimity, wisdom, and compassion as I can possibly muster, and do what seems and feels the most helpful at this time. And specifically, I can be stably available. I can make the choice that no matter what happens, I am here for you. I'm here with you. And even if that means they're in tantrum and they're closing the door, I'm still on the other side of that door. And they can have their tantrum. And I'm not gonna, like, have major consequences to that. The thing I'm going to do is make sure they know that I'm here even though they're tantruming, let's say. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, what is that going to do for that young person for the next 20 years? You can't know. You can't know. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, I would say that a lot of our anguish comes from the mind system having ideas about what should be that conflict from what the Dharma eye is telling you actually is. And the friction between those two things is suffering. So learning to sense when the mind stream is concocting an impossible fantasy within which everything fails in compare. You have to recognize when that's what's at play. And then the Dharma eye will always show you, without error, what needs to happen right now. This immediate step I can see. 5 steps from now, who the hell knows? I don't know. But I know right now. If you're training, see. The mind, the mental formations and discriminations will spit plans at you and theorems and strategies and all kinds of stuff. And they might be useful, they might be completely not helpful. The ideal is that your hara, your 1 point, your Dharma eye, your intuitive mind is the basis. And then what that doing, what that, as that comes up the chain, it feels right. And then what goes further is your thinking supports that. And then what goes further is you creatively engage from this. And even in that idealized circumstance, the result is not up to you. As was said earlier, the whole thing could very well blow up right in your face.
Can you talk a little bit more about effortlessness and how that doesn't mean that you aren't going to get tired?
I'm too tired to answer that question. Yeah, I'm getting exhausted right now. I have been for a while. It's been a long semester. But yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, the fact is that eventually we do, we're going to get tired. We're going to need rest. We're going to need self-care. That's all fine. What the effortlessness is really pointing to, in my view, as I said earlier, is it's talking about the state of mind when you're engaged it. So if I'm in this moment thinking, oh, I have to answer her, what am I going to say to that? Then there's a lot of effort that has to happen. I might come up with a useful answer, maybe, I don't know, but I can't function that way in this role. Instead, simply be present and allow the Dharma eye full contact. And it's kind of like the impulse comes and then the words dangle around it. The words come later. The words are trying to express something that's seen. That's effortless, but it doesn't mean that it isn't tiring. It can be tiring, in all of its different forms. Yeah. But this non-doing, it has to do with eroding a sense of dualistic experience when you're in it. Including merging with being tired. There can be an effortless non-doing of, oh man, I need a nap. When hungry I eat, when tired I nap. Our way is not remote. But if it's really authentically coming from all of that deep place, it is expressing the totality of reality, including being tired. Online, is there somebody?
Yes. Hi, my name is Claire. This has question. My terms and conditions are I'm in my mid to late 70s. I live a distance. Is the audio too low, Winston?
I can't tell what Claire's saying. The answer seems to be yes, although I can't hear you very well, to be honest.
Is that better?
A little bit. Sorry, I was trying to compensate.
Now?
That's better.
Okay. My terms and conditions are I live quite a distance from the temple.
Yeah.
And the odds of getting there sometime are pretty low. I'm in my mid to late 70s, but my understanding is, for me, for my practice, I accept the fact that I'm not going to get an all likelihood realization in this birth. I'm fine with that, but I still know my practices, and it's like where they take me is where they take me, and I don't worry about it. Is that a reasonable attitude to have? I worry sometimes about that.
So the most important thing, Claire, is that whatever life circumstances we are in, the Dharma is always accessible to us. So what we need to do is, with whatever circumstances we are in, make full contact with as much of the practice as is realistic for us to be able to do, whether that's in hospice or in prison or living a block away from the temple. So your life causes and conditions that have brought you to the point you are right now are at this moment beyond your ability to shift in any way. But what is completely accessible to you is how you relate to your practice here, in this moment, in that exact place. So what you must do is realize yourself as the Buddha of the mandala you're sitting in. Now, if you do that, and you have in your heart and in your mind and in your body the aspiration for awakening, and if you in your heart take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, then you've done an amazing bit of progress here, right? But in the same way that I was saying earlier, every moment that you're engaged in is it. So enjoy it. Enjoy your practice exactly as it is accessible to you now. There likely will come moments in each of our lives where the way the Dharma is accessible changes from the way it is now. It's incumbent upon us to know how to practice each of those moments equally. In this moment, I practice on the high seat. In some future moment, I won't be able to anymore. But when that moment comes, believe me, I'm not going to be sitting there feeling the lack of being on the high seat. I'll be practicing wherever I am. And if I've done my job, there'll be someone else feeling this hopefully better than I can. Does that make sense, Claire?
Yes, I mean, I think I'm doing sort of what you're saying. It's just the mind always is like, are you sure what you're doing is right? But it feels right to me. I'm doing the best I can. So it sounds like that's the answer to my question. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, stay with it, Claire. Speaking of tired, it takes me a lot to pull the words out from because we have the air conditioner running in here, so that's not helping, but it is helpful. Pujo, yeah?
So through teaching Dharma school, sometimes it's just really a trip because you wonder what's actually getting through, what's happening.
Yeah, you can't know.
I'm going to change a camera view here. There. So we just taught, about a month ago, we finished up the 5 remembrances. And, you know, I mean, talking to kids about old age and sickness and death. I mean, we dug in. I mean, we did it. And I just, I was reflecting on how so much suffering, just of the immediate people who I'm in my life right now, are just, you know, trying to beat off the 5 remembrances with a stick is how I've termed it. Just like,
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Well, you know, to respond, I mean, you can't know the impact that you're actually going to have on a young person, but can you imagine what a heads up it is to be able to look at your grandparents as a 5-year-old and say, there's nothing wrong here. This is what happens. This is change manifest. Old age happens. Grandma's old because grandma's still here.
yeah, so I had to, you know, talk to my son about dementia. And it was hard. Actually, the talk itself wasn't hard because I knew he's wired just like me. He needs the truth. He needs to have it straight and know what he's dealing with. But it's, you know, it was a very sensitive thing. But like, it's so much less scary when you can just look at it. But then it's actually not that way for a lot. The people who are, you know, can't deal, it's not like that. So it's trying to be aware of all that. But yeah, it makes it a lot easier because he'll know what's coming. And it was really good. And I mean, most of us did not come to this practice when we were children. And, you know, what would it have been like if someone had talked like this to us back then? Because I feel everything, the karmic habit energy of, oh, shield, wait, no, truth. And it's even now, after doing this for almost 8 years, I'm still coming up against it. It's like, wait, what am I avoiding? What am I protecting him from? Oh, nothing. Let's go. But yeah, I'm grateful that we can do this. And
Me too. And hopefully they won't just knee-jerk rebel from it, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And I know I can't control that. You'll need to remind me of that when it happens.
Yeah.
I know I can't control that.
The only comment I have on that is, you know, with our own daughter, and of course everybody's unique. Every family system is completely unique, you know, but we never made her think anything or, you know. I mean, I did teach her to write by having her copy phrases from the Dhammapada, which makes sense to me, you know. We are what we think, that kind of stuff. So it's around, but I mean, you know, giving her autonomy to engage in whatever way makes sense has played out quite well in our case. It could have gone otherwise, but so far, you know, what's happened is as she feels compelled to, she's been able to engage, and she engages to the level she wishes to. And when she does, she's just like any other Sangha member, absolutely not treated any different than anybody else, which is precisely what she wants, but on her terms, you know. So when she's a little kid, she's around it, like it or not. And as she grows up, then it's more and more her choice about how to think and what to think. You know, but then I'm stable and I'm constantly present there. So I'm a reliable presence that she knows she can go away from and return to. And that presence is incredibly empowering for her. Does that make sense? And then it's kind of nice because the Dharma, honestly, you can throw whatever intellectual challenge you have at it and it stands up. So I'm not concerned with anybody actually starting to think differently about the Dharma. Please do. I mean, it's good. You should think about it, and you know, we should all wrestle with it. But it's kind of like saying, well, gravity doesn't apply to me because I don't want it to. And, you know, that's you thing, not me thing. You're not the boss of me. I don't have to obey gravity. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so. All right, any final, is there anybody who hasn't voiced a question that would like to? There's a little bit of time left. I want to make sure to hear everybody who has something to, oh, please. Ayun. Yeah.
My name's Ayun. Thank you very much for all of the teachings. My question has an affinity with many others. I'm learning, surprise, that I bring myself to my interactions with others.
Yes.
And I'm learning the need to show compassion. I'm not learning it yet. I'm becoming aware in ways that don't resonate with me as inherently or as a default. That last was the question. What is that? What's happening, and how do I be present in the moment for the other person when they need compassion, but I'm not skillful in understanding what compassion as they need it is in that moment, or might be?
Well, then just be the Buddha of, like, you know, loving presence. Just be companion. You don't have to have all the answers. If I thought I had to have all the answers, I could not do this job. No way. Absolutely not. I don't. I really don't. But what I do know is I'm connected. That I know. And I trust that connection. Long tested, trained, but it doesn't mean I know all the answers. You know, I have a lot of experience trusting my intuitive mind and sifting it through what I'm feeling and tempering it by my most rigorous intellectual scrutinies. And that can still fail spectacularly, but the most important gift that you can bring at any time is authenticity, your authentic self, right? Like that is the thing. And then if your authentic self is in connection with a situation, that is as much as anybody can do. So trust that. Trust that. And it can also mean I really am very clear about the fact that you need a kind of help that I can't offer. But let's find it together. Let's get a deeper bench here. And I'll go with you. Okay?
Thank you for your teaching.
Yeah. The final gaze. All right. So I want to thank you all for your attention to the sutra. As I opened the day with, I plan to continue teaching chunk by chunk until I've given teachings on the entirety of the thing. I'm not going to confine myself to just the Ango for that. I feel it's a very important sutra that it is very difficult. It has a reputation of being almost inscrutable, and I think it doesn't have to be. It's actually quite clear in spots. And we can find those spots and we can make use of them, and I intend for us to do so. The content today is, I think, a very good, if you pair the morning last time and then what we did today, this is a really solid overall framework. And if you have this framework kind of with you as you encounter the text, it becomes much more transparent what's trying to be talked about, what's being expressed. So thank you for your attention to the sutra and to the teachings and to each other. So let's dedicate the merit. May the merit of this day's teaching go to removing obstructions and obstacles to our own practice and the practice of all the Sangha and all the Mahasangha in this world and all worlds, so that all beings throughout space and time may find freedom from suffering and may learn to live their authentic, true Buddha lives. May it be so. Thank you, everybody. Suju wants to sing Kumbaya. I think we can all just bow to each other and acknowledge. I admit I'm at the end of my energy rope, so thank you all for your practice, everybody. I think we did the formalities nicely this morning. I'm very appreciative of that, and let's call it a day. Do we have to restore the Zendo, or is this the way it needs? Okay, so this can stay. Okay. Yes, and that. Okay. All right, everybody online, thank you so much for your practice and your presence and your contribution to the day. Take it with you.
Could you oversee the moving of that mat? And